Good evening. I'm going to call to order our monthly Airport Authority meeting here on Wednesday, April 19th. If we can get a roll call and determination of a quorum, that would be great.
Chairperson Golden,
Here?
Vice Chair Pulitz, Treasurer Rogers,
Here.
Member Horton, Member Hamilton,
Here.
Member Hutter,
Here.
Member Norvell.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Fantastic. Carl, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? That on there. If we could move on to approve the minutes of the past meetings of the Airport Authority. Any members of the Airport Authority have any questions or comments about the minutes?
One question. In reading the minutes, I just want to confirm that indeed, as represented in the minutes, all of the votes that we took were unanimous in the affirmative. I couldn't remember if the fuel farm one actually had someone abstaining or negative, and I just wanted to make sure that I didn't recall that incorrectly. The bulk fuel motion?
Yeah,
was shown as
there were no
unanimous.
negative votes.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, well, I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes if anyone wants to put it out there.
So moved.
Second.
Thanks, Curtis. So we got a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the past meetings of the Airport Authority. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Point of order, John. I think you should probably abstain because you weren't in the meeting. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ayes. Any abstentions?
I abstain.
And 1 abstention. Motion carries. Modification of the agenda. I have no requests nor intent to modify this evening's agenda. Public comment. Anyone who wishes to address the Airport Authority may speak on an agendized or non-agendized matter related to the airport. Comments are limited to a few minutes per person per topic, and if your item requires additional discussion, please request that I calendar the matter for a future Airport Authority meeting. Any members of the public care to opine on any matter on or off the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Airport Engineers Report.
So, since I was on vacation, there's not actually a WebEx created for the board meeting. So Nadine is not able to dial.
That's fine. Okay.
But I am available for questions. I'm knowledgeable on what they have posted here. So if anybody has any questions, let me know.
Okay, fair enough. Consent agenda. Unless anyone has any reason to pull the consent item, now would be a good time to do so. Seeing none, no takers, we might want to move to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So we have one public hearing item this evening for discussion and possible action to approve the airport ASIP. I'm going to turn this over to Corey, and there's expectations, Corey, that since we have one and only one agenda item, this is going to go quickly.
All right.
Hey, I've been approached by at least 2 people who said, "Hey, we only have one item. This would be the quickest meeting ever." I said, "Well, let's see." So
Well, this will be very quick.
okay, and are you able to put the ASIP up on the monitors?
I'm not set up to do that. Could we do it fairly quickly?
I think that would be very productive if we could do that.
Okay. Gotta hit the button.
You have to wait until it kicks up. I'll let you know when to click it. Sorry, just take a moment. Has anything popped up, like saying that there's
Oh, it's just a
anything USB?
audio thing. Is it? Okay, it is now up on the screen. So, the Airport Capital Improvement Plan, we approve this every year. This is like a 5-year plan, but you typically go out to about 7 years on the ASIP. This does have some changes that it was pretty consistent for the past couple of years. This does have some changes in it, which are pretty good to see. So we can go ahead and get into that now. We are utilizing the bipartisan infrastructure law funding as much as we can here. Armstrong did a good job of defining those projects. We see here that the SRE building has both AIP and bill funding on the ASIP. That is probably going to just be bill funding available for that project. But Armstrong is working on that. That project may end up being split up over a couple of years potentially. We're not sure exactly how that's going to fall as of right now. The phase 3 of the PAPI MALSIF is in here with the IP funding, which we all know we've already been notified that we will be awarded that. The terminal building, we have not yet received an award or a letter declining from our most recent application. But that is here on the ASIP. For fiscal year 24, we see that we made an addition here using bill funding for Extend Runway 927. So on the last ASIP, the beginning stages of the runway extension were essentially declined by the FAA. So what we decided to do is to do a focused planning study and design as a part of one bill project. This will hopefully give us the support that we need to get the approval from the FAA. This is something that I identified early on as a potential issue with runway extension. We have to justify it. We can't just ask for the money. We have to say, we want to do the runway extension, and this is why. I did try to get letters of support from future tenants or people that would have different types of aircraft and this sort of thing. But ultimately, we need a larger planning study, a more professional, a pretty big project to get the justification that we need in front of the FAA to get that runway extension. So that was identified as just design, but now it's a focused planning study and design.
Mr. Chairman, may I address a remark to
Oh, go,
Sorry.
please. You don't need my permission.
just to satisfy my illiteracy? Would you define it says 100 by 800? Tell us what that means.
Well, essentially, what this looks like to me is 800 feet and 100 feet, but I don't know. I do not know exactly. And Nadine is not on the line
Okay,
to help
all
us.
right, yeah, so we need 899 feet to round it out to 7,000, right? And the other question was, is there any potential for widening that runway about 5 feet on either side?
I do not see that as an option because of our category of aircraft. So as of right now, where the entire RSA, the runway safety area, is designed around a specific category of aircraft.
Like
And-
category B, right?
Yes, and gives us a 79-foot wingspan, and that's going to be our safety area essentially. If we were to widen the runway at all, we would then have to change the category of aircraft, which would then change our RSA. We'd have to relocate hangars and fuel facilities.
Yeah, we went through this whole exercise once before.
Mm-hmm.
We did, Harlow, if you recall, and
Yeah,
it's just, this would be so much worse. The airport would have to relocate, as Corey said, multiple buildings, structures.
well, at the time we looked at the category C airport, there was also about 10 homes in the Apollo Drive area that impinged on the RSA,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I just thought I would bring it up.
That does kind of lead into another project, though. You will see that there is the RSA drainage and improvements design project on here. That is a new project. So I've been really pushing to improve the safety areas of the airport, and we actually have a budget item in next year's budget specifically to do that. But after working with our Armstrong and the FAA and through the ASIP meeting, there may be the opportunity for federal funding for improving the safety areas, as well as the drainage on the airfield. Now, this could potentially be a paved shoulder for the runway, out past the runway edge lights and probably not quite to the signs, but out past the runway edge lights. So there is the potential there to have a paved shoulder for the runway. It wouldn't be an officially wider runway, but we'd have the additional pavement there.
I guess the reason that I bring it up, that there are some OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, Dassault Falcon Jet being one of them, for some of their aircraft where the flight manual specifies the requirement for a runway no narrower than 80 feet. What's that?
Yeah.
That's what we're advertised, 75.
Corey, point of reference here too. I think Harlow brought up exactly what I was going to bring up, that 100 feet. This is a conjecture on my part, only a conjecture. I think it's an error. I think it should be 75 by 800, because obviously it's not a 100-foot wide runway.
Well, no, I think what he was saying is that it's like 100 foot on one end. Well, no, that doesn't make sense
no.
either.
It's an error, is what it is. That's a guess on my part, but it doesn't matter. The runway is 75 feet. The other thing I'll point out is, because I've had experience with the paved shoulders at another airport, they are not load bearing and they're porous asphalt. That's what they are. They can't support the weight of an aircraft.
I think the subgrade material extends far enough out for that. That's another reason that I asked when we reconstructed the runway and realigned it 3 degrees to the north on the east end. that that subgrade material extends far enough out to actually do that. But what you're saying is that the runway safety area, because of the increased length, would then infringe upon existing hangars?
If the width, you had asked about widening the runway.
Well,
If you recall on that, and Steve can, better discuss this than I, but if you recall, when the runway was moved, just that slight tilt made the airport have to do something with Graber's hangar.
yeah, we paid him $38,000 for that corner of the hangar.
Right. So if you moved,
Well,
if you expanded the width of the runway, now you're moving into other buildings.
I do think there is an opportunity during the design phase to pursue all options. And if all we need is an additional 5 feet of pavement, but it doesn't actually change the category of aircraft, then it could potentially be done.
because I thought we were going from center line to center line, like the center line of the runway to the center line of the taxiway. In other words, we don't want to change the design criteria of the airport from what, B2 to C3.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't want to do that. But if we could get an additional 5 feet on each side, that would give us 85 feet. And the reason I bring this up is that folks who insure larger airplanes are looking at the dynamics of the airport where the airplane is going to be based. And if there is a concern or a conflict with the airplane flight manual, then there could be an insurance question for super mid-size or larger airplanes that want to be based at the airport. So as long as we're talking about the extension, it's an important question to ask, because I remember when we realigned the runway, I was on the board at the time, that subgrade material extends out, I don't know, 8 or 10 feet on either side, and that was purposeful because we had wanted to go to a C3 design criteria, but were unable to do so because of,
RSA.
I think it was a navigation easement as well that was a problem. So I understand that C3 is probably not possible unless we buy homes off the east end of the runway, which we're probably not going to do. But the technical question is, would that keep us from adding 5 feet to the either side of the runway, keeping everything else the same? In other words, a B2 airport can be used by approach category Charlie airplanes, even though the design criteria is category B. So approach speeds, in other words, above 121 knots. And I waded deep into this last time, but if we're going to look here in the next few years, at trying to increase the runway length, we should explore all options in terms of widening it 5 feet on either side.
Harlow, is what you discovered vis-a-vis the Falcons something unique to modern Dassault aircraft manuals? I mean, obviously we have Gulfstreams, we've got Globals that we see at Carson. Is this a peculiarity of the modern Dassault flight manual?
Without talking to each of the manufacturers, I don't know. But I do know that for super mid-size aircraft and up, 75 feet it would be considered tight, and some insurance carriers may look at it that way. I think, Brad, you may know if the Falcons are unique with respect to runway width requirements. So if I had a $35 million Falcon LXS and I went to my insurance broker and I said, I want to base this airplane in Carson City, they may not be happy about that.
And by comparison, I'm just looking it up, a G650 is 75 feet. So we're at that flirty edge, and it's a really great thing that we're bringing up at a good time as we think about this, you know, to explore at least what the options are or aren't. Because obviously we want to make ourselves available, and, you know, is Dassault potentially the leading edge of changes that you could see in future models of the same sized aircraft?
Because I think our weight-bearing capacity now is single main landing gear. But I don't think there is a specification for single tandem or twin tandem. I'd have to look at the airport facility directory to refresh myself, but I don't
There's
think
not.
so.
You're correct.
Yeah, okay. So, you know, it's an important point. If we're going to move into those waters, we ought to explore, you know, for the future revenue posture of the airport and the ability to attract super mid-size aircraft.
Yeah, and I think we have two opportunities to look into that here. You know, both with the runway extension as well as the drainage and RSA improvements. Because the drainage and RSA improvements would be a project that would involve pavement along the side of the runway. But if we're talking about having to relocate the edge lights or something like that, it could become a really big project really
Yeah.
quick, far exceeding either one of those projects' scope.
I can see that, but we're ambitious.
But we can
You
look
know,
at it. We can
Like I
definitely try
landed
to.
to Santa Monica for years before they chopped the end of the runway off. It's 100 feet wide, 4986 or something like that in length. It's 100 foot wide.
Hmm.
So we come smoking in there, and you know, but it it worked. So I just wanted to get that on the table as part of the thought process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Corey.
The other projects on here are all brought over from previous ASIP that we've seen before, rehabilitation projects, reconstruction of taxiway Bravo. The state is looking at doing a very large pavement testing project. And if that goes through, we may get some more data on conditions of pavement. And I could see that changing future projects out past 2025, but you know, that far out, we've got time for planning. But nothing there has changed. The only changes, you know, the addition of the bill funding. You know, we're able to fit more projects in each of these fiscal years because of those funding opportunities. And that about covers that.
One quick question, if I might, just on that, if you can roll back up to the fiscal year 26, 27. So I note that if all were to go according to plan, we have the construction of our runway extension in fiscal 26, and then we have pavement rehab, I think, per our kind of ongoing schedule in 27. I was just wondering if, from a practical standpoint, you wouldn't do the pavement rehab on the whole thing at the time that you did the extension.
That's a really good point. That is a really good point, but I do think the FAA would consider those two projects to be separate projects. And this is going to essentially utilize all of our funding. So that would just, from a funding perspective, we would have to split that up.
Corey, at the risk of dragging this conversation on too long, I do have a question about the runway extension for you, and it doesn't have to do with the extension per se, but the construction going on at the southwest corner of the airport. Did we ever reach some sort of resolution with the owner of that property to lower the height of the building?
It has been resolved, and the FAA has issued a determination of no hazard, and that did factor in the runway extension.
Okay,
So there's no conflict.
so that's done and under the rug and
Yep.
over with.
Yep, it is resolved.
Okay, fantastic.
And Corey, on the SRE building, you talked about possibly having the funding for that span over 2 fiscal years, and yet have the bid out to build and I don't think the bid involves a long process like that. Do you think, am I wrong, or what am I missing in there?
So the bid for the SRE building was yesterday. Armstrong received bids for that. They did get 3 bids for that project. The lowest being coming in at about 1.3 million for the project. That exceeds what we have laid out here in the ASIP. So there will potentially be issues with federal funding for that project. And that's why I mentioned that it could end up being split into multiple projects. If that's the total cost, there is the potential there to have to find a way to get it fully funded. So we may have to create like a separate project next fiscal year to do half the project this year, half next year, something like that. Unfortunately, Nadine's not available for questions. That would really be an appropriate question for her. But that's why I see it being split up, is because of the total cost. There's just a potential for that. We'll see what happens when we tell the FAA this is what the bids came back as. Will you be able to fund it? And we'll see what they say. They're either going to say yes or no. And if they say no, then we'll have to look at getting creative to find a ways to cover those costs.
Thanks, Corey. Anybody else have any questions?
Just go into a little bit the difference between AIP grant and BIL grants, and what the chances are getting one over the other, and why we're splitting them up, or what the differences are.
Yeah, sure. So AIP funding is the type of federal funding that the airport is very familiar with. That's what we've always received for our federal projects. The bipartisan infrastructure law is something that the current administration in Washington passed early on after Biden was elected, creating this additional funding for projects for the Department of Transportation and including the FAA. So the bipartisan infrastructure law is a separate pool of funding that we've never had access to before. But now we've got access to it. I'm not sure how the allocations are determined exactly, but this ASIP includes what our allocations would be. So this is essentially additional projects that we're able to do because of that law, that bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed. It's a really great opportunity. This is also the reason that we have the opportunity for terminal funding. Terminal funding would not normally be an option for us, but as a part of that bipartisan infrastructure law, they set aside a specific funding pool for terminal funding. So that terminal funding opportunities that you see in the ASIP, that's even yet another pool of funding, separate from the standard bipartisan infrastructure law funds that are allocated to us. So that's kind of the breakdown on that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, maybe just a follow-up to that one. So Corey, when you have the FAA looking at something, and let's use the SRE building, are they the integrator that actually looks across those pools of money and says, okay, we can patch this together for Carson City by using X amount of BIL and Y amount of AIP, or do we need to do some gymnastics to stitch those together?
We get feedback from the FAA through our ASIP planning meetings, but it's really our engineering consultant that develops the ASIP. They're the ones putting in the work to figure out what funding we're going to have available and how to allocate it. So and we did get feedback from the FAA. Like we applied for the SRE funding as one grant, but they came back and said, well, this is really going to end up being two different grants. So apply for two separate grants, one under the bill and one under AIP. So we actually ended up with two different grant applications for that project. So I guess it's a collaborative effort between our engineering consultant and the FAA. But the heavy lifting from here is coming from Armstrong. They're the ones doing the allocations and figuring out how to split the funding.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Thank you, Corey. That's been quite informative. Appreciate it. Looks like we got a pretty full plate of potential projects to work on going forward with some great capital improvements coming to the airport if we can get the funding.
Yes.
Fantastic.
I think, Michael, I think we're required, are we required to give a formal approval to this plan, Corey, at this time?
Yes, so this is going to need to also be approved by the city. And before we put it in front of the Board of Supervisors, we need the approval of the Airport Authority approving it. So I would recommend approving the ASIP following a review of the 100 by 800 number and ensuring that that is correct before it goes in front of the city. That's about all I can think of.
So are you suggesting we refrain from approving it at this time until we verify that?
I think that you should go ahead and approve it, but with the condition that I put in the work to ensure that the 100 by 800 number is correct. And if it needs to be amended, that I amend it before it goes in front of the city. This would make it to where I don't have to wait until the next board meeting to put it in front of the city, making it so that I can make any amendments needed between now and the city's meeting.
Okay. Well, maybe John, would you like to make a motion?
I move that we approve the 2022-2023 ASIP list as submitted, with the exception that we require the manager to review for a possible typo on the 100 by 800 designation on the runway extension.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the ASIP as submitted, pending confirmation of the actual dimensions of the runway extension.
I think you meant to say the 2023 to 2028.
Well,
ACIP,
oh,
didn't you?
see, that is, the 100 by 800 is in multiple locations on that ASIP.
But the overall document is the 23 to 28.
Right.
Since we're kind of opening this, I think I like the term dimensions, because as Harlow, I believe, brought up, is it actually 800 on the other dimension, or is it 899? I just want to double check what we're going for.
So the runway extension itself, we will be able to determine what the actual dimensions are during the design process. We will take advantage of that to get as much runway as possible. I'm really pushing for the utilization of something like EMAS to get as much length as possible out of it. That will be determined during design, and we won't have those exact numbers until that portion is complete.
So should we also be adding the term approximately or something? I don't know how critical this is, but we're bringing up that we see one likely error on the width. Do we take this opportunity to maybe amend that further? Or does it not matter?
If it would matter at this point, during design, we're going to get as much runway length as we can with our RSA restrictions.
And we may not be able to get that 900 feet, and I don't think I could be wrong. I think the constraint there may be how much land we actually have on the west side of the runway.
Yeah, so it's, our restriction on the west side is Gonai Road. And then on the east side, it's the neighborhood.
That's also the turning area on the upwind off of 27 under Terps. Could be an issue, but maybe tell us about the EMAS a little bit. If everybody doesn't know what that is.
EMAS is like, I don't remember exactly what it means, but it's an emergency arresting system that essentially will be at the end of a runway. And if an aircraft runs off the end of the runway, it's going to bring it to a stop much quicker, making it so that your RSA can be smaller off of the end of the runway. And it's really expensive. EMAS is very expensive, but it's probably cheaper than moving Gonai Road.
So like an emergency truck ramp,
It's
where
emergency.
the weight of the vehicle crushes through the surface into the soft material below and slows the vehicle down rapidly.
Brings it to a stop.
Yeah.
Interesting material. I've seen it, and I've seen it used. I've actually seen what it looks like when an aircraft hits one. It looks like a block of concrete, but it's like really porous material that's going to collapse as the aircraft nose gear runs into it. If you run over a piece of it with a truck, it's very expensive to replace, because that does ruin it if you hit it with a vehicle. I've seen that before too. And it can be very, very expensive. But it's a really cool thing. It makes it possible to get more runway length. It's just our limiting factor is going to be cost with something like that. Will we be able to get federal funding for that much federal funding? But that would all be considered during the design phase of the project.
Well, we'd also discuss things like displaced thresholds, for example, that would be usable for takeoff, so it would increase the takeoff field length, but we would not be able to land on it.
Right, and
If you've been down to Camarillo recently.
we already know that it'll have to be displaced thresholds. And that's one of the reasons why we know the runway extension will not impact the Mousef design, because the design of the runway extension does not actually have the threshold moving on 27.
Oh,
And that's why the Mousef and the offset PAPI, we're not worried about that being impacted, because there's no plan to move the threshold. Because we already know that we don't have the RSA available to us to move the threshold. We've only got the space to move, like you were saying, for the takeoff roll and not for landing.
right. Yeah, I mean, you can land a G650 in, 3,500 feet. That isn't the major issue. The major issue is takeoff field length, Anyway.
Right, and that's what we would be gaining with this project, is that takeoff field length, which is good. But we would gain a little bit on both sides, because this is a runway extension off of both sides. So while the total length won't be available for the landing aircraft, the little bit of rollout that we're getting on each side would be available. So, there's going to be some gains there, but not much.
Yeah, the big issue with landing distance comes with a contaminated runway. For many operators, that would, double the length, but it is what it is at some point,
You want to try and
You want to give it another try?
you may. If not, I'll give it a crack.
Why don't you give it a crack?
Okay, if everyone's okay with the chair making a motion. Okay. Right. Let me take a crack at it. If anyone doesn't like it, they can. Yes, Corey.
Maybe it would be easier that you ask staff to ensure there are no errors and to correct any errors.
That's about what I'm gonna do.
Then you don't have to
Right,
mention specifically.
Right. Well, I'm gonna move that we, oh, thank you, John. I'm gonna move that we approve the ASIP that's been submitted for the fiscal years 23 through 28 with verification of dimensions of the runway extension and giving the manager the latitude to revise those numbers as needed for correction purposes.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Danielle, did you get that okay? Okay, if not, talk to me afterwards. Okay. Corey, you want to give us your manager's report?
Sure. So our fuel numbers were lower than last year for March, which I was a little surprised about. I've seen a lot of activity out there. I don't know, Michael, do you have any insight as to why that might be?
Weather.
Yeah.
All 3 months is weather.
Yeah, we're still
I
getting
mean,
that
we just
snow.
had one of the snowiest seasons and actually the coldest winter in 70 years. One of the top winters in also 70 years, one of the top 3 or 4 for snowfall and precipitation. It's just weather.
Mhm.
That's all it is.
So other than the fuel numbers, open house planning is going well. We've made some more progress specifically with sponsors and vendors, at least with the marketing side of it. The planning committee has put together a subcommittee for fundraising, and that group has finalized the documentation for sponsors and vendors. So we are pretty close to getting every portion of this project complete, as well as many other advances, which I don't really need to go into the specific details. Just we've made progress on open house planning. I made some website updates with feedback from Tim Poulis, and we also identified a list of quite a bit more that we're going to be making this month to make some improvements and updates to the website to get the data more current. The sign is now complete. We're working on another project to improve the ground immediately surrounding the sign, as well as improving the existing sign that's still out there. Our new sign did replace one sign, but there's another larger sign out there that needs to be improved. And Rick Lee is already well underway with planning to get that improved, and he can do all of that work himself. So that's a big project that he's going to be working on. I did not have enough time to prepare the ADSB numbers for March, but I do know that they're lower than they were in February, slightly, which is right in line with the fuel flowage numbers. And that's all that I have for the manager's report.
Corey, might I make a suggestion not to burden you with any work whatsoever if it's easily done? You might consider each month when you do the ADSB numbers,
Mhm.
comparison to the prior year, same period. That way, if the fuel numbers are off, you can say, oh, well, they're off by 20%. Oh, our flights were down by 19%.
Yeah.
That would give you and everybody else the answer you're looking for in that regard. If, again, only if it's easily attainable.
Yeah, I'll look into doing that for sure.
If not, don't bother. But if it's
Okay.
something that you got at your fingertips, go for it.
Sounds good.
Corey, who's our webmaster? Who manages our website?
It's a company called In Vogue, and they're a web development and marketing company. Tim and I do most of the regular edits to the site ourselves. But if there's anything that requires a web development professional, we have them available, and they do a good bit of stuff for us.
Okay, thanks, Corey. Appreciate it. John, we missed you last month. We did. I say that sincerely, and so your time has come. Treasurer's report. Pardon me? Oh, that's correct. Steve, do you have anything to report?
I have nothing to report.
Thanks, Steve. Sorry to skip you over. John, you're up.
You can see the numbers. There's no surprises in there. I just want to mention a couple of things. One, we do have adequate funding for our share of all of the projects on the ASIP. And two, next month, we will be required to do a final budget submission. We'll have required to approve our final budget before it's submitted to the state. And so just a preview of coming attractions. And there may be a few changes relative to capital projects based on what we've learned during the ASIP discussions with the FAA. That's all. That's the only changes I would anticipate, if any.
Thank you. Report from Airport Authority members. Anyone? I have.
Mr.
Oh,
Chairman,
go
I
ahead.
just have
Yep.
one thing. Been a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2.5. I was in my vehicle driving around the perimeter road, and just past the porta-ports and approaching the big drainage ditch that runs north and south. On the immediate east side of that ditch, there is a gate that accesses the fire department training area. And I witnessed a person crawl on their stomach underneath that gate with a backpack, grabbed it, ran straight across in front of me, across taxiway Alpha, across the runway, across the center triangle, and to a drainage ditch lined with riprap to the immediate west of Mustang Manufacturing, crawled up that ditch under the fence and kept on going. I reported that to both Corey and Rick. They didn't stop. They didn't mess with anything. They just kept going. I watched them all the way.
Okay.
I don't, that's about it, but thought
Fair
I would
enough.
report that for whatever.
Okay. Fair enough. I have a couple things to report. The local chapter of the EAA on Saturday flew 124 kids, which we believe was a record for a Young Eagles Day here at the airport. 124, well, I'll call it local area youth. I know when I flew some of the kids, I had one from Fallon, I had one from Cold Springs, so they weren't all from Carson City. We had 16 aircraft and pilots and oodles of ground volunteers, and it was an absolute success. The weather could not have been better. It was made to order, and the folks at the EAA who put this on, I want to tip my hat to Larry, who is the coordinator for Young Eagles at the chapter. He had 3 routes, very well thought out of what aircraft you're in, how fast you're going. Okay, you're going on this routing. Very well thought out. They really, really knocked it out of the park. Both Tim and I flew kids Saturday morning. So we were, if you will, 2 airport authority representatives. But we do it all the time. So it doesn't matter we're on the authority or not. But we were both flying kids. We came in to pick up as many as we could. But 124 is a lot of kids, and 16 aircraft and pilots volunteering their time. And those aircraft and pilots were predominantly from Carson City, but there were 2 from Truckee. There was at least 1, possibly 2 from Stead, and there was 1 from Reno. So that was just a incredible event. Larry, again, who's the Young Eagles coordinator, tells me that they're going to do this again in 3 months in July. So we're sponsoring that for them, and they just had a really good event. Had hundreds of people between the kids and their parents and guardians, and they were out having breakfast. Corey was there with us, helping out. He can attest to anything else you want to add to that. Yes, Paul.
Why was this one so big? What did we or someone do to?
It's Larry. I got to give. I don't want to say his last name because I don't want to mispronounce it. Obviously, I'll say I'll say that his last name is Crapo, Crapo. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing it correctly. But Larry's the new Young Eagles coordinator.
That's it.
What's that?
That's it. Crapo.
Crapo. Okay, that's correct. All right. Larry is just the new Young Eagles coordinator, and he's taking it seriously. And he was able to rally the troops, get everybody involved, and get the kids out. That's, to the best of my knowledge, that's how it went down. I thought it was extremely well organized. I don't know, Corey, if you have any opinions on what you saw.
It went really well. The safety aspect of it was my biggest concern, but the EAA did a great job.
Yeah.
They also kind of had a couple of different events going on so that it put people in different groups. They had static aircraft displays, which took people out of the terminal and kind of spread them out a little bit, so there was not an enormous crowd in any one location, and they managed that really well. There was no safety risks with what they were doing, which was great. And also, I was monitoring the radio traffic throughout that event, and the pattern was really busy, but all of the pilots got along really well. There was no yelling over the radio, so that's good. And so just overall, despite of how busy it was a really safe operation.
Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. And I had personally agreed to sponsor the next event or provide sponsorship for it for the pilots to make sure that they get, a good deal on fuel. I can't say enough good about it. I think they did a fantastic job. For those of us who fly it, we're just having fun. It's all the folks on the ground doing the work.
I noticed how well advertised it was compared to prior years.
Again, I
Yeah,
give Larry all the
it was
credit.
very easy to find it out in the community, and that seems like a change. But I also think we probably ought to expect a big turnout at the open house this year because people are so sick of being inside for the last couple of years that they're getting out and about. And so all the events that I'm involved with organizing that involve public, attendance are wildly bigger than they were before COVID.
One other matter I will bring up. I spoke with Stan Jones this morning. Stan sends his best to everybody. He's busy as a bee. He doesn't know how he gets things done, but he does. And he mentioned to me that Senator Rosen has staff here in Carson City that comes up once a week from Las Vegas. And he's going to coordinate a meeting with myself and whoever that person may be at the airport to try and get some exposure to our funding requests so that we can get some assistance from them. We have had that assistance in the past in the form of letters from the senator. Unfortunately, it didn't yield any results. Not saying that it won't, and Stan is encouraging us to keep trying. If at first you don't succeed, try again. So he told me he would volunteer to coordinate and be there with us to outline what we're looking for. So that's my report. On that note, Any public comment? Anyone want to speak to anything we've discussed this evening? Okay. I know we're going to have at least one thing coming up on our agenda for the next meeting. John brought it up, which is a final budget. Is that correct? Corey, anything else we can look forward to that you want to disclose?
We should have a request for proposals for the board's approval for engineering services because our engineering contract is up in November, and we need to make sure we stay ahead of that and we go through the proper selection process. So come November, we're prepared.
And that's engineering and planning. We did those both at the same time 5 years ago.
Time flies. Fair enough. That's about it, folks. Thanks everyone for your hard work and participation. We're adjourned.